All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig in a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video. Check out Pig in a Pickle. Two locations, Corte Madera and Emeryville. They're open 7 days a week in Marin from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. or until they run out. And they're open Wednesday through Sunday in Emeryville. Pig in a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. All right. This is an interesting time of the year. We've now had the draft and we've had NFL free agency, and then we had kind of after the draft free agency, and then you had the OTAs, then you had the mandatory minicamp. So this is literally the calm before the storm, which is known as NFL training camp. Soon, training camps will open in the third week in July. Rookies will report in the fourth week in July. The veterans will report. And by August, we're playing preseason games. And by early September, the NFL teams are all paring their roster down to 53 guys and getting ready for week one, which for the 49ers will be September 10th at Heinz Field against the Pittsburgh Steelers. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the stories that are out right now that are really of interest. And this is the time of the year I like to take a look ahead, in that we know who's been drafted where. We know what teams signed which free agents and how everybody's roster is starting to take shape. And in the NFL, you sign guys in free agency because you don't know if you'll be able to get a player in the draft. And then maybe you do get a player in the draft and then you've got a surplus. Or maybe you wanted to get a player in free agency, thought, know what, we'll pass on him in free agency. We'll go fill that need in the draft. And then the draft comes and goes and you don't fill that need. And then you wind up, sitting there still having a need in July before camp begins. Well, this week, there were two articles written, one on ESPN.com and the other on Bleacher Report's app, about one player on each team that could potentially be cut at the cut down as teams pare the roster down to 53. And the 49ers have one of the NFL's better rosters, so very few of the players cut by other teams probably can make their roster. But they also have a couple positions of need as well. And there were some interesting guys mentioned here as possible cut downs that I would definitely have interest in if they indeed get cut as teams try to pare it down to 53. Now, the one guy that people are speculating the 49ers may cut that is in this mix is Ambry Thomas, which I thought was interesting. Ambry Thomas, third-round cornerback, draft pick out of Michigan in 2021. He's managed 36 tackles in 27 games thus far with the Niners. The issue is that he kind of took a step back after his strong finish to his rookie year. He was a 5-game starter as a rookie and maybe was the Niners' best corner at the end of the year. And then last year, he only played 41 defensive snaps all season. So he was totally in the doghouse. He obviously did something to regress. He's only going to be 24 years of age this season. The Niners look like they're about 6 or 7 deep at the corner. There's a very good chance Ambry Thomas doesn't make this roster. But he's also too good of a football player and too good of a prospect at corner, a position of need for many, many teams around the NFL, that maybe the 49ers could wind up trading him if he's not going to make their roster. We'll find out the answer to that question probably at the end of August and early September. But just looking at the list of the number of players around the league who they're projecting as potentially going to be cut makes you start to wonder about, would the Niners have interest in these guys? Now, let's go through a list. I've got about a dozen names here that are interesting to me. Number one on the list is Chase Claypool. Now, Claypool has been critical of Kyle Shanahan's practice habits in the past, so it's probably not a fit. He obviously washed out with the Steelers. Then, the Bears made a trade where they traded way too much. I think they gave a second-round pick to the Steelers, and he just didn't play well. He caught only 14 passes for 140 yards and 0 touchdowns in the Bears offense last year in 7 games. But Claypool is big and strong with great ball skills. And to me, if you could get him on a more professional team with, higher standards, real veteran leadership, and get the most out of him, Chase Claypool could be a dominating third receiver next to Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Now, I know you got Juwan Jennings, you got Danny Gray, you got Ronnie Bell, you got Tay Martin, But I think Chase Claypool is a bigger talent than a lot of those guys. And if you could get him for a day 3 draft choice, I would do it. I would do it. I really think that he's a guy that he's so strong out of the slot. I think Brock Purdy throwing the ball in the middle of the field to a guy like that, when you have Debo and Ayuk as well and Kittle, I mean, Claypool could be an absolute dominating player in the 49ers system. And I think you could get him for cheap because I think the Bears are looking to move on from him, and they've gone in some other directions. They added DJ Moore and a couple other receivers. I think Claypool potentially could get cut. So that's interesting. If he's cut, I would definitely have interest in Chase Claypool. A couple other receivers that they're saying headed towards possible cuts. KJ Hamler. I like Hamler, loved him at Penn State, but I think he's lost some speed since his Penn State days due to the injuries he's had. And he's awfully small, so I'd probably say pass there. But man, I mean, if you really needed a vertical threat and he looked good in the preseason, I wouldn't be afraid of going after him. Corey Davis is a quality veteran receiver who's played with the Jets this last year, played with the Bengals before that. I don't think Corey Davis has ever really been on a good enough team to really take advantage of what he does. He's a big receiver. He's a mismatch. He's got great strength, great strong hands, terrific in the red zone. I really like Corey Davis a lot. And if he gets cut, I mean, that's a guy I would definitely have a lot of interest in. So those are the receivers that are going to be out there. Now, there's some other guys that are at different positions. One is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the running back for Kansas City. Niners are stacked at running back. They also think Joe Mixon, by the way, that the Bengals may cut Joe Mixon. So those guys are out there. And I've always liked Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire, lost his job to Isaiah Pacheco, but there's no slight in that. Pacheco's a stud. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think, still is going to be a very good NFL receiver, running back, receiving running back. I think he would really fit well in the Niners system. I would like him for sure. Doesn't have a lot of mileage, shifty. I think he could be really good at getting outside in the outside zone. I like Clyde Edwards-Helaire quite a bit. If he gets cut, I'd be interested in him quite a bit. Then let's talk a little bit about positions of real need, which is offensive tackle. There's talk in Cincinnati that Jonah Williams is moving from left tackle to right tackle, and that the Bengals may cut Lael Collins, who started with the Cowboys, originally at LSU. Lael Collins is a huge talent, and man, he looked good against the Niners in the couple years ago in the playoffs. If you don't love what you're getting out of Colton McKivitz, if you're hedging on Colton McKivitz, heck, if you just want another tackle that has true NFL starting capability, Lael Collins might be your call. There's not a lot of good tackles available. If a guy like that shook free, I'm most definitely making that phone call and bringing him in for a look-see. Then there's 3 defensive ends that I think are all of interest. One is Derek Barnett from the Eagles, who tore his ACL in week 1 of the 2022 season, but he's very inexpensive at $3.1 million. They're loaded with DNs in Philly. Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, Brandon Graham. They just drafted Nolan Smith in the first round. There's a very good likelihood that Barnett winds up getting cut. You just added Hargrave from the Philly line. I'd take Barnett. He's tough. He's productive. As long as he, checks out physically coming off that ACL, I'd have a lot of interest in him. Alton Robinson, they're saying, may get cut in Seattle. The former Syracuse outside rusher began his career in Seattle with a really strong first year. He had 22 tackles and 4 sacks in 2020. But then now Seattle's brought in Derek Hall, and there's a lot of depth there at that position. And Alton Robinson may wind up getting cut. If he gets cut, I'm definitely interested in him. You can never have enough corners, and they're saying Rashad Fenton may get cut in Arizona, and Amik Robertson may get cut by the Raiders. Both those guys are good NFL corners that I think can play. And as I said, you can never have enough good corners. And I'll say this, the name that is probably, I like Claypool the most of all these guys, but the one name that also is on this list, and you just never know if a guy like this could shake free, but Neville Gallimore, the defensive tackle for Dallas. A lot of people feel like Dallas, who just drafted Mozzie Smith out of Michigan, they've got a lot of depth up front. And Neville Gallimore, according to these reports, may get cut. Now, I'm a huge Gallimore fan. I'd rather have Gallimore than Kinlaw. He's big, he's strong, he's fast, he can rush the passer. He's quicker than Kinlaw, he's healthier than Kinlaw. He's not quite the talent that Javon is, but the health is better. I think the movement ability is far better. That's a guy that I absolutely am signing if he gets cut. Is Neville Gallimore. And then the last one is kind of an interesting one as well. Atakundo Okundeji, who's the edge rusher in Atlanta, played at Notre Dame, was a 5th-round pick out of Notre Dame in 2021. He started 27 games over the last 2 seasons. But the Falcons have added so much on their D-line at the end spot. I mean, Calais Campbell's in there now. They got Bud Dupree. They just drafted Zach Harrison. They already had Lorenzo Carter. They've got Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State. They got D'Angelo Malone from Western Kentucky. And there's some thought that Okundeji may just slide right off the roster, getting caught up in a numbers game. And he's a long, rangy defensive end who can do some nice things. So Barnett and Okundeji and Alton Robinson would be the 3 defensive ends I'd be looking at. But Amik Robertson and Rashad Fenton would be the 2 corners that I'd be looking at. Lael Collins would be the offensive tackle that I'm looking to see if he shakes free. And then defensive tackle Neville Gallimore. If somehow the Niners could wind up with a couple of these guys, I'd take Claypool, Lael Collins, and Neville Gallimore and put those 3 guys on the roster and just call myself a deeper football team for doing it. So it's going to be an interesting cut down for sure. Every time the league cuts down, there's always good players that wind up moving on. And you know what? Sometimes guys just don't fit. I mean, Marshawn Lynch, I should say. Talking about Neville Gallimore. I had Gallimore on the mind, but Marshawn Lynch, was a 1st-round draft choice of the Buffalo Bills. It didn't work out for him in Buffalo. But he went to Seattle, and he was pretty damn good in Seattle. And the league is littered with guys who, weren't great in one spot, but were very, very strong in their next stop. So just because Chase Claypool wasn't good for the Steelers and Bears or wasn't consistent enough for those teams doesn't mean he couldn't be a great Niner. Just because Lael Collins is kind of bounced around a little bit doesn't mean he wouldn't be a phenomenal starter at tackle for the 49ers. And just because a guy like Neville Gallimore may wash out of Dallas doesn't mean that the Niners couldn't really utilize him in a rotation in Chris Kocherik's one-gap, get up the field and rush the passer scheme. I think Gallimore could give the Niners more than they're getting from Kinlaw and play in a defensive tackle rotation. So it will be interesting. Derek Barnett's another name. I mean, if you're looking for an edge rusher and you don't sign one, you don't sign, Justin Houston or Melvin Ingram. You don't go for Ngakoue. You get toward the end of camp and you're looking for somebody, and a guy like Barnett shakes free. I'd be interested in that. You're talking about a guy with a high motor, a lot of production, really good football player at Tennessee. He's been a good football player most of his career with the Eagles, and maybe he gets caught up in a numbers game. So it will be interesting when teams pair their roster. It's not just the guys in the Niner camp competing for spots. It's some of these guys on the edges of other teams' rosters who may get set free right at the cut down that could ultimately become 49ers. All right, hope you enjoyed our video on the cut down possibilities that may exist later on this summer. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of The Krug Show, and thanks to all of you guys for supporting The Krug Show on YouTube.